Virginia Offshore Wind Coalition was started by Ann Flandermeyer Kerwin and Angie Wiesek back there. They created a firm called Principal Advantage, and they now have Julie Dine as a partner also. They're all former legislative aides, worked for Vector Corporation. But Ann and Angie got together to create Virginia Offshore Wind Coalition because they love Virginia Beach, they love Hampton Roads, and they thought this would be a good place for having wind development. And you know, it was not for personal gain or anything else. They just saw it as a good thing. So this is when folks get together and work really hard, good things can happen. So the Virginia Offshore Wind Coalition, you'll see in a minute, has been very important in moving wind development forward. There's also Eileen Lewandowski's here. Eileen's been at every meeting I've been at on wind development over the past 4 or 5 years, so she could give this better than I. Mark is also Mark Swingel's part of our BOEM Virginia Task Force, and he's been an active participant in all the meetings we've been having on offshore wind development. So there's this thing has been going on for quite a while. So let's go to the next one. The real initiative to start offshore wind development was created through Senator Frank Wagner's comprehensive energy bill from the 2008 session of the General Assembly, 2007. As you can see this map, this dark area, the Virginia offshore wind energy is about 25 miles offshore. And these are very good winds off here. Let me look at the, 21 miles an hour average at 90 meters. Wind along the surface of the ocean is oftentimes only about 2/3 to a half to 2/3 what it is just a couple hundred feet higher, just because of the friction going across. So the wind energy at hub height, which is the central part of your windmill, is really important. As you'll see later on, the hub height is going to be around 400 feet. These are phenomenally large infrastructure. Go ahead, please. Met towers are a very important part of the calculus for wind energy. You basically have to have the real wind speed, the real wind power, the energy that's available at hub height, but you have to have that data for a course of at least a year, 12 months, so you get all the seasons. And it should be, it helps a lot if it's actually where the wind farms are going to be. But we do have a very long record. George Hagerman from Bistro says it's the longest continuous record of wind energy measurements basically on the East Coast, because NOAA and other organizations have had some anemometers out there, and they've been taking these readings over the course of a year. And they're about at 130 feet, still way below hub height, but it is a nice long-term record of wind. Again, it's about 12 miles offshore. A lot of folks are concerned about the impact of windmills on birds. There were no birds on Chesapeake Light Tower. And even more important to me, there were no bird droppings. Birds just don't hang around out there. There were 1 or 2 birds way down on the pilings down below, but up at 120 feet, there was no evidence that birds hang around there whatsoever, which I thought was really fairly remarkable. You think that the gulls or whatever would stay there and end up possibly being impacted by windmills, but it's just something to remember. That's one thing we sort of check off, that there may be little or no danger to birds offshore. This is the call for information. This area, the western edge of this area is about 25 miles offshore, and it's about 20 miles wide, maybe 15 miles north to south. You say, well, gee, why did they go so far offshore? Well, they weren't going to build anything closer than 12 miles, because that's to get into U.S. waters. But they also had so much ship traffic and everything around here. And you can see on the next slide, this shows all the overlay of the depth, the warning area. Here's the Chesapeake Light Tower right here. Basically, this area, though, is now gone and scrubbed by all the defense agencies, the Coast Guard, the pilots, everybody else, the shipping industry, everybody else, and this is the area they said you could develop in. It's important that we try to keep the area water depth under 100 feet. 100 feet, you can usually stick a monopole into the seabed, and it's fairly inexpensive compared to tripods or even more expensive floating platforms. Although the technology is changing, but we were really looking to keep the depth less than 100 feet for cheaper development options. These are the folks that have expressed an interest. It's in your PowerPoint here.
About how many people, how many businesses, how many active?
These are 7.
7?
Yes, ma'am. Now, not all of the firms have asked to develop the entire area. Some of the firms just want part of it. Valda requested in our comments to BOEM that they have at least 2 developers. BOEM has indicated, and I'm pretty sure this is what's going to happen, they're only going to award the lease to 1 firm. The lease will be basically 3 parts. Preliminary term for 6 months, then 5 years where they go out, they want to do more environmental work, they do site assessment, and then the long-term lease. The lease is about $350,000 a year, $336, something like that. And then once you start developing wind, you have to pay pieces of a penny on the kilowatt hour back to the federal government as royalty. Eileen, who is better informed than the chairman of the Virginia Offshore Wind Development Authority and our 2 senators, has information that the lease is going to be announced on Monday. And so that's really great news. We're finally getting through the process. They're going to have a mock auction, so to speak, over the telephone, and then they'll have the actual lease. Again, I think they're going to end up awarding to 1 firm, and that's going to be over the next several months. This sort of shows you how the cost of electricity coming to your house, what are the major cost drivers. So you've got fuel over here at 28 cents. And your average bill is $103 for 1,000 kilowatts. So let's say Dominion is providing us power at basically 10 cents a kilowatt, which in their cheapest source of electricity production right now is nuclear at like 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. 1,000 kilowatts, I guess it is, because it's fully amortized. Everything else, and something else I really need to bring home to you all. We have a regulated utility. Dominion Power is required to provide the least cost of electricity to the Commonwealth. Let me say that again. They're required to provide us the least cost of electricity. So they have to go to the State Corporation Commission for all of their changes, and they have different tariffs to get to your bill. There's about 10 different items in there. If Dominion wanted to go out tomorrow and buy more expensive electricity or provide a higher cost source, they would have to get State Corporation Commission approved. Virginia does not have any renewable energy credit process either. We have voluntary program where Dominion is supposed to get up to 15% through renewable sources, and they've just announced they're building some biomass plants, or I think the first one came online. But there's no requirement like in some other states, because the General Assembly is not required. There's no requirement for them to have renewable sources. So if you've got fuel, and obviously the wind blows, doesn't cost anything. Your distribution, you're going to have some costs to get there. We'll touch that in a second. And the generation basically is the cost of the windmills. I've got a slide later on. There's a lot of discussion about how much wind power costs, but the sort of accepted thing is about 50% more total cost than the sources Dominion's using right now. And again, they've got a blend of sources they're using. They import a lot of electricity. Mayor Sessions had his Alternative Energy Task Force. Some of y'all, I think, participated in that. And he's got a really great report that Clay Burnett, one of Steve Herbert's folks, wrote that's still on our website, where we looked at all the energy coming into Virginia, the demand for energy, and you know, it's just going up like this. It was abated somewhat by the recession, but everybody's got a cell phone on. Those need charging. Everybody talks about hybrid cars. Well, it's still got to get plugged in to get charged, so there's going to be, you know, power need to be generated for that. at least until recently, it used to be if you were going to do a wind farm, you had to have one med tower for every 50 windmills. They've actually come up with something called floating lidars now, which is basically a laser type of radar that can very, very accurately measure the wind at certain heights, hub heights, and even higher than that. The technology is fairly well accepted, but it still helps to have a working anemometer at hub height, and that's what Bill Maurice will be talking to you all about in a little bit in the next presentation. What's involved after the lease? Again, the med tower, gather the med data for about 12 months, secure the power purchase agreements, construct the windmills, additional environmental work, and other data collection. We've had a presentation on scouring around. You put a 12 or 15 foot wide piece of concrete into the ocean floor. What is the ocean going to do around that? Is it going to scour out down 20 or 30 feet and make the tower unstable? Those are all the type of work that's have been going on, and even more work is going to have to be done in the future. Coring, where the towers go down. You have to find out how far down you get, to sand or what other material is down there, and that determines how deep the tower has to go into the ocean floor. Okay, as wind turbines increase in size, the ability to transport and handle land becomes limited. That's why Hampton Roads, as Governor McDonald says, and Mayor Sessions says, could become the Silicon Valley of wind development, wind energy on the East Coast. One windmill is like 5 to 10 jobs each in construction. So if we had a development of 250 windmills out here, that'd be 2,500 jobs at the most. One of the problems with the fact that our development area is 25 miles offshore means a lot of those guys and girls are probably spending nights offshore in something like not a cruise ship, but like a barge out there, a living barge, because otherwise they're taking 2 hours each day going in and out. So they're going to be living offshore, constructing these things. Obviously, a lot of that's going to be weather dependent. Keeps the cost going up and up. The fact we're 25 miles offshore hurts us because it's going to, incrementally increase the cost of developing offshore. And then for the life of projects, we're going to have 2 jobs per window. And these are jobs that are $50,000, $60,000 a year. Biggest obstacle is price of natural gas. You've heard about fracking. This is the price of natural gas from 2006 over here, where it was over $13,000 a million cubic feet, to now it's down right around 350 million cubic feet. Again, with a regulated utility and cheap customers, we all want, most of us want by and large, the cheapest electricity possible. I know most folks are willing to pay a slight premium, and again, Dominion is never going to get all their power from wind development, so it goes into a blended rate. But this, I think, is one of the biggest disincentives to offshore wind energy in a competitive environment. Just because you can go and you can put, unless the SEC allows you, you can go build a gas turbine plant pretty quickly, pretty cheaply. And those, you can throttle on and throttle off. It's not like a coal plant or some of the other plants, a nuclear plant, for instance, that you really can't throttle back or turn off if you don't have the demand. Federal tax credits, this is like the backbone of most of the wind development deals. They get a certain amount of tax credits from the federal government. The feds have been renewing those year by year. The uncertainty is killing folks. The cost of carbon, right now in America there really is no cost of carbon. Dominion has done a great job with their newest coal plant. They've designed it so you can do carbon sequestration, and they're working hard on that technology. Renewable energy credits, again, as I mentioned earlier, we have voluntary in Virginia. We don't have mandatory like they do in some states. But we're working really hard on this, but I still think it'll be 2020 before we come to the fruition of this. Any questions?
for being with us today.
All right, and I'll start with a caveat. Bob just did the very broad scope, and I'm going to do very narrow and talk about the grant, and then if there are questions, we can talk more broadly. And then Chelsea asked me to stick to offshore wind because I have a tendency to verge into other topics. If anybody wants to talk about any other Dominion issue that is not offshore wind related, I'll be hanging around, so I can do that afterwards. Does that make sense? Just go right over here. Go to the first slide. All right, so how this grant process works, everybody got $4 million roughly. And I'm going to do, for those of you who are really precise with numbers, I am not that person, so I'm going to round. But everybody got $4 million initially. The idea is that's for sort of pre-development work, and this is a great governmental term that I really like. They will then down select in theory, 3 of the projects. So my reading of the grant, different people read it different ways. They could, if they wanted to, they could pick 2. And, but in theory, 7 projects got $4 million, and then the idea is that we'll down select 3 to get an additional $48 million, which sounds like a lot of money, and it is. It is a lot of taxpayer money. That would essentially fund the development costs and the pre-development costs, but not the actual construction for the 2 6-megawatt turbines that Mr. Matthias referenced. We are, to my knowledge, have not put a public number on what constructing those 2 would cost. It would be, suffice to say, more than the federal grant money. So in other words, the federal government picks up the development costs. We and our coalition partners, in theory, pick up the construction costs. Okay. So think of it in a way, if this were, and this is a very rough analogy, if this were a traditional building project, you're picking up the A&E costs, the architectural and engineering costs, and we would be picking up the construction costs. So that's where the State Corporation Commission part comes in. The way Virginia law works right now, to build 2 6-megawatt turbines, we would follow the same process as if we were requesting to build a nuclear plant or a coal plant or a gas plant, and that is we would seek an application for what's called a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, a CPCN in utility jargon. We'd also need all the environmental permits, but this is essentially the State Corporation Commission's role, and their view is we can do anything, but we need to go through them if we want to recover a penny from ratepayers, customers. By the way, for those of you wondering about visual impacts, Bob, I think mentioned this upsize, even these 2 test turbines would be 22 miles offshore. Megawatt, let me explain what that is. And this is one of those averages of an average. One of the first things I did when I came to Dominion, it was 7 years ago now at this point, was, okay, a megawatt, how do we say what that is? And there are actually varying views within the company of how many homes equal a megawatt. Of course, energy doesn't just go to homes, it goes to commercial businesses, it may go to industrial business, it may go to nonprofits, but homes has been sort of how we explain a megawatt. Taking a series of averages and with all the imprecision that implies, a megawatt's about 250 homes. So if you want to think about it in that way. And actually what that is it's sort of blending homes and businesses. But a megawatt of energy is about 250 homes. So if you think about a 6-megawatt turbine, which is what these are now, and to remind you what Mr. Matthias said, the onshore turbines we use at Mount Storm, West Virginia, or Fallow Ridge are 2 megawatts. So these are 3 times more energy. And with offshore wind, you also get a higher capacity factor. That means it runs more often. Because frankly, it's windy more often offshore than it is onshore. If you think about a 6-megawatt turbine, it's about 1,250 homes. So if you think about this project, 12 megawatts, about 2,500 homes when the energy is available, which would be, and again, I'm rounding, about 40% of the time. Give you some standards of comparison. A new natural gas plant might be 1,300 megawatts. That would be a 3-on-1 combined cycle, and it might be available 85% of the time. Nuclear plants back when we built them in the 70s were just shy of 1,000 megawatts. One today, if you were to try to permit, would probably be 1,300 to 1,500 megawatts. The technology we've looked at, the Vogtle project in Georgia, they're around 1,000 megawatts. Nuclear really should always be available unless something is wrong or it's being refueled. Nuclear runs essentially around the clock for reasons Mr. Matthias went up. Virtually all your costs in nuclear are getting open for business. So at that point, having absorbed enormous capital costs, you're trying to run as often as possible. Coal, really effectively can't permit new coal right now because there's not the carbon technology would be. The Virginia City plant cost 1.8, and it was 600 megawatts. Okay, and coal will run right now. There have been times. There's a thing in utility language called the dark spread. It's between gas and coal. Typically, coal is cheaper, runs in front of gas. In much of the last 5 years, gas has been dispatching before coal because it's cheaper. The way the system operator runs, we're part of a multi-state ISO, an integrated system operator. So we don't decide what runs when. PJM, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland is what the PJM stands for. They were the first 3 states in the film. And they dispatch in order of basically cost. So your most costly stuff runs last. The most costly stuff, typically gas peaking units, giant, think of them as giant 747 engines. They run only on the very hottest days, like maybe yesterday. Today would be a very hot day, but probably not a peak day because it's a weekend. If you get a day during the week where it's very hot, it's been hot for a period of days, that's when you get one of your really hottest 10 days where we're a real peaking resource. Okay, so where are we looking at? This is the commercial lease site that Mr. Matthias mentioned. We have the insider information. Monday, you're thinking they're going to? Monday. And Eileen? And this is
Straight from the mouth, Eileen.
all right. I did not independently verify. I'm told this is the latest lease block. This has moved around over time. Some of the people who have weighed in, Bob talked a little bit about this. The Navy weighed in. Different parts of the Navy actually weighed in. The Coast Guard weighed in terms of where were the blocks available for lease. Just sort of give you a bottom line on this. While there may not be as many lease blocks available as you might have in an ideal world, there is more than enough to keep all the banks, engineers, construction people involved in this occupied for at least a couple decades. So that's a good problem to have, and then we'll reassess at that point. I can only speculate what the Navy might be doing in 20 or 25 years. So there's enough to keep us busy for a good little while, and definitely beyond Mr. Matthias and my working lifetime. So we're in good shape for a while. There's plenty of energy out here. By the way, just to put a megawatt in perspective, our all-time peak's a little over 20,000 megawatts. And that was last summer actually on like 102-degree day. And some of the other things that come in, Mondays and Fridays are not usually as big a peak days as Tuesday through Thursday. Why do you figure that is? Yeah, because more people, if people are going to be off, it's typically on Monday or Friday. And the peak day tends to come on the 3rd or 4th day of really extreme temperatures. All right, some key milestones. The down select is going to come sometime next year. That's where we find out if we go to the next stage. If we go to the next stage, there's at least $48 million at stake, maybe a little more if they only pick 2 projects. We feel like we've got a good coalition, we've got a good project, and really we feel like the good coalition is a big part of this. We're not just a developer saying, pick us, it's a developer plus the state, plus an engineering firm, plus a permanent manufacturer. So we feel like we've got a good coalition. And if we get the next slide. Right now, we've been doing the marine surveys as part of the initial stage of the grant, and this is everything from avian life to marine life to making sure we're not interfering with any of those beneficial uses I just talked about, whether it's drone exercises, Navy, commercial shipping. 22 miles offshore, I don't think there's a lot of recreational use would be impinging on. Like I've heard me last, but what about surfing? If you're surfing 22 miles offshore, you are a lot better than I am. Okay, so, and the whole point of this project, is I should emphasize, is to get at the last issue Mr. Matthias showed you, which is trying to lower the cost. The way we've done in the past is not always the way you should do it. For example, natural gas generation costs have come down because instead of doing, back in the day, 2-on-1 combined cycle, we now do 3-on-1 combined cycle, 50% more efficient. Trying to do some of the similar things here. One of the things we're looking at, for example, is borrowing some of the technology from the offshore rig industry. This has nothing to do, by the way, with offshore drilling, other than we're trying to steal some of their technological thoughts of how do you reduce the cost, strengthen the rig, or strengthen the strength of the offshore asset while using less steel. And less steel means less money. So we're looking at some of those designs. We're also, as Bob was implying, the bigger the turbine, frankly, the lower the cost sort of per unit. So we're trying to get as much efficiency as possible out of the turbines. Next slide. And here is the twisted jacket we've been talking about, and it is, again, a concept borrowed from the Gulf of Mexico drilling. That is a business Dominion was in before I came with the company 8-9 years ago. We were in that business. We've sold all that. We have no drilling assets offshore or otherwise anymore. But we do still have some structural engineers who think about these problems, and it's an analogous problem. It's not exactly the same issue, but it is, you want something stable, that's going to last through a hurricane, through a nor'easter or whatever it might be, and also be cost efficient to build. So really, like nuclear, offshore wind is like nuclear in the sense the first megawatt is really, really expensive, and then the costs go down from there. So it's very capital intensive. No fuel costs, obviously. Some maintenance costs, but a lot of your costs are in your first megawatt.